Hi, Lou Pulsfer here to talk about interrupt cards, or what are called instants in Magic the Gathering. These are cards that you can play out of turn. You can play immediately or instantly. You can interrupt the flow of play. My favorite is Divine Intervention, which lets you cancel any card played by another player. Of course, you probably don't want more than one of that kind of card in the game, or it becomes a little over the top, a little extreme. Now, this tends to apply, this idea of interrupt cards, to games that are turn-based. If you abandon a turn basis, then all cards may effectively be interrupts. So why have them in a game? Well, card games are not inherently highly interactive. Instead, each player does his or her own thing. That's not true of all card games, but that tends to be the way things work out. And of course, that's especially true when there's more than two players. So interrupt cards provide a way for a player to interact directly with another one, and a chance to jump the queue, get out of the normal turn order. Interrupt cards also make downtime more interesting because you can play an interrupt when it isn't your turn. So you might need to pay attention, and you might find it interesting to pay attention to what's going on. Now, what I don't think you want to have happen is to have the interrupts become a kind of take that. You don't want them to dominate the game. Of course, there are games that are dominated by interrupts, and Magic the Gathering may be one, certainly Yu-Gi-Oh! Another. But in general, if you have too many powerful interrupts, you may end up with a chaotic game, a take that game, where one card can change conditions drastically. Well, some people like chaotic games. Flux, for example, which is very popular, is an example of a really chaotic game. But many people do not like chaotic games. There are different kinds of players, which I've talked about in other videos, that are planners, adapters, and improvisers. Well, the improvisers like things to change, so they don't have to think ahead. But not everybody likes that. It depends on what kind of game you're designing and what kind of designer you are and what kind of games you like. If you like chaotic games, then having lots of interrupts is a good thing in most cases. So, what are some categories or examples of these kinds of cards? Well, the first one is one I've already mentioned, one that cancels or nullifies a card played by another player. That didn't happen, or if you preferred, Divine Intervention. Then you can have cards that increase or decrease the strength of opposition, whether to another player or to yourself. For example, I have a pirate game, and much of the game is about encountering ships on the high seas. Well, when you encounter a merchant, you can play a card, an interrupt, that slows it down or makes it easier to capture. Or somebody else can play a card on a warship when you encounter one of those to make it stronger, or you can play one to make it weaker. In my Viking adventure game, Sea Kings, you can play a card to make it harder or easier to raid or settle an area. Another category would be quite simple: re-roll a die or re-resolve a conflict. Another category: change economic or other conditions. Raise the price of a commodity when some player is about to buy it, or decrease the price when you're about to buy it. You can force a change from war to peace or from peace to war in certain games. You can have famine, drought, floods, good weather, and so forth, weather generally. Another category is to take the credit for something or move the blame onto someone else. In Sea Kings, there's a card that enables you to take the credit for somebody else's discovery. In effect, you've stolen his points. But that actually happened. And so I've put it in the game. You can have interrupts that change the play sequence, one that lets you seize the turn or change the turn order. One that lets you see what another player is going to play before you play, as in a conflict resolution, where you're both playing cards. In general, interrupts change the rules, usually temporarily, sometimes permanently. So, if you want multiplayer solitaire, then interrupts should be avoided. They're there to provide interaction and work very well when used in moderation. Thanks for listening.